The conductor said it once, and then he said it again, and neither time did he look at Miriam Aldwell when he said it. Off the train, Palestone Station, your ticket's been flagged. Miriam had been traveling for 4 days. 4 days of hard bench seats and grit that worked its way into everything. Her collar, her cuffs, the corners of her eyes. She had slept in snatches and eaten from the cloth bundle she'd packed in Cincinnati because the dining car was 15 cents a plate, and she had exactly $9.60 left to her name, counted twice that morning, while the Nevada desert unrolled itself outside the window in shades of rust and bone. Flagged, she said. What does that mean? Means it ain't valid. The conductor was a compact man with a jaw like a shelf and the manner of someone who had practiced his authority until it no longer required effort. The fare from Cincinnati to Reno is one thing. The freight you've got on board is another. You're carrying 2 trunks. 1 trunk's included. 2nd trunk cost extra. You didn't pay extra. I was told 1 trunk and personal luggage. Miriam kept her voice even. Her mother had always said the voice was the first thing to go when a woman lost her composure, and she had decided at 16 that she would not let it go. The clerk in Cincinnati told me explicitly, 1 trunk and personal luggage. I have 1 trunk. You got a trunk and a case and a hat box. The case and the hat box are personal luggage. That's what everyone says. The conductor had already moved his attention past her, which was more insulting than anything he'd actually said. Palestone's a 5-minute stop. You can wire for a new ticket from the station house. Miriam looked out the window. What was outside was not a station house in any sense she recognized. It was a shed, weathered gray timber, a hitching rail with nothing hitched to it, and a sign that had once said something and now said most of it. The platform was dirt. The land beyond was sage and distance in equal measure. There is no station house, she said. There's a telegraph office in town. The conductor nodded toward the window, 3 miles east. She looked at him. He had already begun to move toward the next car. I have a letter of employment, she said. I'm expected in Reno by Friday, if you leave me here. Train leaves in 4 minutes, ma'am. The other passengers in the car had gone very quiet. A woman in green traveling clothes looked out the window with careful attention. 2 men in business suits had found something absorbing in their newspapers. A boy of perhaps 12 watched Miriam with the wide, honest eyes of someone who hadn't yet learned to look away from things that were uncomfortable. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Miriam stood. She retrieved her case from the rack above her seat, and she picked up her hat box, and she walked to the rear of the car, and she did not slam the door when she went out. On the dirt that passed for a platform, the porter had already set her trunk down. The train was already producing the sounds of a thing about to leave, the deepening breath of steam, the small shudders that moved through the cars like a decision being made. Miriam stood and watched it go. The dust it raised settled slowly. The silence was different from any silence she had experienced in Cincinnati. There, silence still had the shape of the city around it. Walls, streets, the possibility of another person around the next corner. This silence was just silence, open in every direction, going all the way to the mountains. She put down the hat box. She sat on her trunk. Her mother had taught her to make lists when everything went sideways. Not lists of what was wrong or what was gone, but lists of what was actually presently, concretely real. Miriam had thought of it as a child's exercise until she had needed it for real, the first time. At 22, when the school where she taught had told her quietly that her position was being eliminated and replaced by a man with fewer qualifications and the right last name. The list had held her together until she'd figured out what to do next. She made one now. What she had: 1 trunk, 1 case, 1 hat box, $9.60. A letter of employment from a Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Soto of Reno, who had hired her to tutor their 3 children in mathematics and literature through the fall term. A good wool coat, presently unnecessary in the September heat, but worth knowing she had. A tin of crackers and the last of the cheese from her bundle. A head for numbers, which was not a physical thing, but which had gotten her further than most physical things in her possession. What she did not have: water, transportation, any knowledge of the 3 miles between here and a town called Palestone. She was good at mathematics. She calculated the distance and the angle of the sun and the approximate number of hours of light remaining, and she understood that 3 miles of flat desert ground was a different proposition from 3 miles in a city. She stood up. She picked up the case and the hat box, and she left the trunk where it stood, and she started east, because 4 miles before dark was not impossible, and 4 miles was better than 0. The road was harder than it looked. The surface was caliche and loose gravel in alternating patches, and the afternoon heat pressed down from above and rose up from the ground simultaneously. She had walked perhaps half a mile when she heard the wagon. It came from behind her, from the west, moving at the unhurried pace of something that knew the road. She stepped to the side, not into the brush, because she had been told enough about desert plants to know that stepping into Nevada brush without looking was inadvisable, and she waited. The wagon was a working wagon, functional and plain, canvas-sided, pulled by 2 bay horses with the patient look of animals that have covered this ground before. The man on the driver's seat was somewhere in his middle 30s, broad-shouldered in the manner of someone who had built that through use rather than intention, with a hat that had seen genuine weather and 2 days of stubble. He slowed when he saw her. He stopped. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," Miriam said. "Thank you." He looked at the case in her hand and the hat box hanging from her wrist, and then he looked at the road behind her, where the train tracks ran, and the platform shed was now a small gray shape at the edge of visibility. "Train put you off," he said. It wasn't a question. "I got off the train," Miriam said, which was the version she preferred. He accepted this. "Where are you headed?" "Palestone, and then Reno eventually. I have employment in Reno." He was quiet for a moment, in the particular way of a man who is thinking rather than filling silence with words. "I'm going through Palestone. I can take you, or I can keep going." He said it without the weight of someone offering charity and waiting to be thanked for it. He said it the way a person holds a door. "Here, if you want it." "Thank you," Miriam said. "I'll accept." She lifted her case into the wagon bed herself. He watched but didn't move to help, which she noted. She climbed up to the seat beside him, and he clicked to the horses, and they moved. The road unrolled ahead of them in the flat, clear Nevada light. Neither of them said anything for a while. Miriam observed. The wagon was well maintained, the traces in good repair, the hardware clean and oiled. A rifle in a bracket beneath the seat. In the wagon bed, fence posts, spools of wire, and a wooden crate stenciled with the letters J. Rook, Ironwell, Nevada. Rook, that was his name, or close to it. "I'm Miriam Aldwell," she said. He glanced at her, brief and unperformed. "Jess Rook, rancher." "I suspected," she said. He raised an eyebrow very slightly. "The crate," she said. "And you're going away from town rather than toward it, which means your errands are done. And you're going home before dark, which means the ranch isn't far." Something happened in his expression then, not quite a smile, but in the same territory. "What else?" "The horses know this road. They're not paying any attention to their own feet." He looked at the horses. He looked back at the road. "Good eyes," he said. "Good at numbers and patterns," she said. "It's the same skill." They rode in easy silence for a while. The mountains went from tan to purple as the sun dropped. Miriam thought about her letter of employment, and whether the Sotos were the kind of people who would still want a tutor who arrived 2 days late by means she had not anticipated. "What brings you to Nevada?" Jessie said after several minutes. "Employment. A family in Reno hired me to tutor their children." "What kind of work before that?" "I taught mathematics in Cincinnati for 4 years. Before that I kept my father's accounts. He owned a hardware concern. Nothing large. I managed the books from the time I was 15. She paused. He had a talent for the business and less talent for the numbers. I had less talent for the business, and considerably more for the numbers. He was quiet in the particular way she was already starting to recognize. Not uncomfortable, just receiving. "My father had debts," she said. She said it with the levelness she'd worked at. He made an arrangement to clear them, and the arrangement involved me, which he did not discuss with me until it was already made. I disagreed. I left before it could be finalized. "What was the arrangement?" "He pledged me as a teacher to a private academy in Chicago. The academy paid his debts in exchange for a 5-year teaching contract, which is a polite way of saying they purchased 5 years of my labor without asking whether I wanted to sell it." She looked at the road ahead. "I don't have a quarrel with teaching. I have a quarrel with not being asked." He nodded, slowly, the way he nodded when something landed true. "So you found a different position." I found the first position that was far enough away that retrieving me would cost more than I was worth. She looked at him. I'm told Nevada qualifies. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, something more careful and more real than that. Probably does, he said. They were 2 miles outside of Palestone when the left bay horse began to move wrong. Jessie felt it before Miriam saw it. She could tell by the way his hands changed on the reins, a small, precise tightening. He brought the horses to a stop and climbed down without hurry. Miriam climbed down too, which seemed to mildly surprise him. He went to the left horse and ran his hand down the foreleg and lifted the hoof and examined it in the failing light. He set the foot down. He straightened. He looked at her. Shoe came off clean, he said. No damage, but I can't push him 2 miles on this road in the dark. Miriam looked at the sky. The last light was maybe 40 minutes out. We stop here, he said. I've got camp supplies. First light, I reset the shoe and we're in town by mid-morning. He paused. You can have the wagon bed. I'll take the ground. Miriam thought about it the way she thought about everything. With the facts in front of her, and without the noise of what other people might say about the facts. The facts were, this man had offered her a ride when he had no obligation to, and in the 2 hours since she'd climbed onto his wagon, he had treated her with the same unadorned respect he'd probably offer any person on any road. He hadn't made her feel small. He hadn't made her feel watched. All right, she said. She helped with the camp, not because he asked, but because she identified what needed doing and did it. She managed the fire while he tended the horses. She found the coffee pot in the supplies he unpacked, and the tin cups, and she had coffee ready by the time full dark down and brought the Nevada stars with it. Miriam had been told about the stars in the desert. She had not believed the people who told her. She revised her opinion now completely. Jessie made food, salt pork and beans, plain and sufficient, and she ate without remarking on the plainness, because plainness is not the same as bad, and she was hungry. You said you were good at numbers, he said after a while. I kept books for a textile merchant in Cincinnati after I left the school 2 years. He taught me that the numbers people want you to miss are always the quiet ones. She looked at the fire. He was also the man who wrote my recommendation letter for the Soto family. He was a fair man in most things. The arrangement with my father was not his doing. Jessie turned his cup in his hands. The man in Chicago who made the arrangement. He sent anyone after you? She looked at him. The question was direct, and it was the right question, the one she'd been carrying since Cincinnati, the calculation she'd run and not resolved. I don't know, she said honestly. I've been moving quickly enough that it hasn't mattered yet. He was quiet for a moment. If it ever does matter, he said, Ironwell's a town that tends to take care of its own. She opened her mouth and closed it. He'd said it simply, without fanfare, in the same tone he used to tell her where the coffee pot was, as if it were just a fact about the place. I'm not from Ironwell, she said. Not yet, he said. Miriam lay in the wagon bed that night and looked at a sky that had more stars than she had known to believe in, and thought about the list she'd made that afternoon on the platform. She had not listed the possibility of a man who stops on a road. She had not thought to include it. She was still thinking about that when she slept. In the morning, Jessie had the shoe repaired before the sun cleared the ridge. He worked with the economy of someone who has done this many times and didn't need to make it a performance. While he worked, Miriam rebuilt the fire and made coffee, and thought about what she knew and what she didn't. She found out what she didn't know within an hour of reaching Reno. Mrs. Alma Soto, a brisk, thin woman whose friendliness had the quality of something worn for company, met Miriam at the door of the Soto household and led her to the parlor and said, without preamble, that there was a small matter to discuss. Gerald Soto's business partner had sent his own daughter to Reno 2 weeks prior. The daughter had expressed an interest in tutoring. Commitments had been made. The position was no longer available in quite the same form. Miriam sat with this. She heard it fully and did not fill the following silence with noise. I traveled from Cincinnati on the strength of a written offer of employment, she said. I am sorry for the inconvenience. Mrs. Soto said it in the tone of a woman who was sorry in the way that costs nothing. Miriam looked at her lap. She thought about what she actually had right now in this moment, $9.60. Her skills, those were still hers. She stood and she thanked Mrs. Soto, and she walked out into the Reno afternoon and stood on the front step and made a decision. She sent a telegram to Ironwell, Nevada. Jesse Rook replied within the day. She arrived in Ironwell 3 days later on a stagecoach, with both trunks and a clearer sense of what she was doing than she'd had since Cincinnati. Ironwell was not large. Main Street had a general store, a hotel, a livery, a doctor's office, a saloon, and a post office the size of a generous closet, and a schoolhouse. Technically a schoolhouse in that it had been built with that intention, and had spent the past 3 years as storage for the county assessor's overflow paperwork, because there was no teacher. A woman appeared on the boardwalk in front of the general store and watched Miriam climb down from the stage with the frank, unself-conscious appraisal of someone who had decided long ago that social pretense was an inefficiency she couldn't afford. "You the one Jesse Rook sent for," she called. Miriam turned and faced her directly. "I came at Mr. Rook's suggestion, yes." "What for?" "He mentioned the town needed someone who could manage figures, and that there was a schoolhouse." The woman came down off the boardwalk. She was perhaps 55, with gray woven through dark hair and the posture of someone whose opinions had always mattered, and who had never seen a reason to apologize for this. "Edna Pritchard," she said. "My husband runs a store. You got a name?" "Miriam Aldwell." Edna looked her over with the thoroughness of a woman taking inventory. "The schoolhouse has been a filing room for 3 years. Smells like old paper and bad decisions." "I've worked in worse conditions," Miriam said. Something shifted in Edna's expression. Not approval exactly, but in the vicinity of it. "Come inside," she said. "I'll put on coffee." The coffee was strong, and the conversation was stronger. By the end of it, Miriam had a clearer picture of Ironwell than she'd had from the stage. She had also learned that Jesse Rook's ranch accounts had been in disarray since his ranch manager left the previous spring, and that the valley's only flour mill, run by a man named Porter Thane, had recently expanded its operations in ways that had left the small mining claims in the area feeling, as Edna put it, like they were working harder and earning less without being able to say precisely why. Miriam thought about that, in the particular way she thought about numbers that didn't add up. Jesse came into the general store 20 minutes later. He looked at Miriam, then at Edna, and read the room with the same direct attention he brought to everything. "You made it," he said. "I said I would," she said. He almost smiled. She took the position managing his ranch accounts. 3 mornings a week, fair wages, her own room at the hotel. The books were what she had expected from a capable man who had let an essential system lapse. Not careless, but layered with months of unfilled receipts and approximate records that worked individually but gave no picture of the whole. She spent the first 2 days building a structure before she touched a single number. She liked this part, the before part, the seeing what's actually here before deciding what to do with it. On the 3rd day, she found something. It was in the milling records. She had pulled 6 months of receipts from Porter Thane's mill and set them beside the input weights recorded at the mining claims before they brought their grain and ore in for processing. The numbers didn't match, not by a lot. Thane was not a stupid man, but consistently by a margin that compounded into something real over time. She set the relevant papers in a separate stack and kept working. When Jesse came in at noon, she said, "I need to ask you about the mill." "Go ahead." "Have you ever compared the weight recorded at a claim before delivery to the weight recorded at Thane's mill on receipt?" He looked at her, not specifically. "You should." She turned the papers toward him. "He's under-recording input weights. Not on your accounts, you're a buyer, not a sender. But the miners and small farmers who bring in grain and ore for processing are losing weight on every transaction. And it's consistent, which means it's not an error." Jesse studied the figures. He had the look of a man absorbing something he didn't want to be true. "How much, total?" "I'd need the individual claim records to give you a real number. But based on the variance, it's not small, and it's been going on long enough that most people have stopped noticing." "That's why it's worked," he said. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly why." They brought it to the county assessor first, then to Marshall Croft. Miriam prepared the summary, clean, documented, the math laid out in terms simple enough that there was no room for argument about the figures themselves, only about what the figures meant, which was, in her experience, the only argument worth having. The confrontation with Porter Thane happened on a Tuesday in the marshal's office, with a room full of people who had come because word moves through a small town ahead of anyone's ability to stop it. Thane arrived with the manner of a man who expected to negotiate. He had money and standing and 11 years in the valley, and he had navigated difficult conversations before. He had not navigated one with Miriam Aldwell holding the summary sheet. These figures represent a period of equipment irregularities, he started. The scale was recalibrated in March. The irregularities begin in September of last year and continue through last week, Miriam said. After the recalibration you're referencing, the discrepancy increased. An equipment problem improves when the equipment is fixed. This got worse. She met his eyes across the table. An error is inconsistent. This is consistent. Those are not the same thing. Thane looked around the room. He was doing the calculation she recognized. How many people, what they knew, whether any of this was still manageable. Marshal Croft, who had been sitting with the patience of a man who trusted the process he'd agreed to, cleared his throat. "Porter," he said, "I had a second set of eyes on these numbers this morning. They check out." The calculation came out. The ground under the strategy didn't hold. Porter Thane paid it back, not cheerfully but completely. Afterward, on the street in front of the marshal's office, Edna Pritchard materialized from the direction of the general store, with the timing of someone who had been watching from a particular angle. "The numbers did the work," Miriam said, before Edna could say anything. "The numbers did the work because you found them and put them in order, and stood in a room full of men, and didn't let anyone tell you you'd misread them." Edna's tone was the tone of someone delivering a fact, not a compliment. "Come have coffee." 3 weeks later, the man arrived. Edna told Miriam before breakfast on a Wednesday. A man had checked into the hotel the previous night, come in on the eastern stage. He'd been asking about Miriam, how long she'd been in Ironwell, who she worked for, whether she had plans to stay. Miriam knew who it was before Edna finished the description. His name was Willard Gast. He worked for Roland Chase, who ran the Aldrin Academy in Chicago, the institution that had purchased 5 years of Miriam Aldwell's labor from her father for the price of a cleared debt. She told Jesse that morning. She told him plainly, the way she'd found he preferred, not because softening things was dishonest, but because he handled the direct version better than anyone she'd known, and she had come to trust that about him. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he said, "He can't compel you." "No. I signed nothing. My father made an agreement about me, not with me. There is no binding instrument." She looked at the accounts spread across the table between them, the clean columns she had built over 6 weeks from nothing. "But he can make claims. He can talk to people. He can imply that I have obligations I'm not honoring. And in a town that's known me for 6 weeks versus a man who comes with letters from a respected Chicago institution. That's not how this town works," Jesse said. She looked at him. "You recovered money that Thane had been pulling from this valley for over a year," he said. "You're about to reopen a schoolhouse that's been closed since the Hayes administration. Edna Pritchard has fed you breakfast 8 times, which in her accounting is equivalent to a year's standing." He held her gaze. "A stranger with papers from Chicago doesn't outweigh that, not here." She had prepared herself for several responses. Practical advice, cautious distance, the discomfort of a man who doesn't want to be involved in someone else's history. She had not prepared herself for this one. Plain and direct and entirely without condition. "You can't know how the town will respond," she said, because she needed to test it. "I know how I'll respond," he said, "and I know Edna, and I know Croft." Willard Gast came to the ranch on a Thursday. Miriam was in the records room when she heard the unfamiliar horse, and she was at the door when he knocked. He was perhaps 45, well-dressed in the Eastern way that read as expensive and impractical for the climate, with the bearing of a man accustomed to arriving at people's homes and leaving with what he came for. "Miss Aldwell," he said, the smoothness of rehearsal. "Mr. Gast." She kept the doorframe between them. "You can say what you've come to say." His eyes moved past her into the house. "Mr. Chase sent me to discuss your obligations." "I have none," she said. "I signed nothing. My father had no authority to pledge my labor to your employer. What he sold he did not own. The Academy invested considerable funds on the strength of an arrangement." "On the strength of an arrangement with a man who did not have my consent," she said. That is Mr. Chase's error, not my debt. She met his eyes. If you have a legal instrument binding me to the Aldrin Academy, I would like to see it. If you don't, we're done. The door behind her opened. Jesse came in from the back of the house and crossed the room with the unhurried walk of a man on his own ground. He looked at Gast with the same direct attention he gave everything. Not angry, just present, fully and immovably. Let me tell you about Ironwell, he said. He didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the room and he spoke in the level tone of someone stating geography. Marshall Croft doesn't have much patience for men who come into his town and make threats against residents. He doesn't consider it a legal gray area. He considers it harassment. He looked at Gast steadily. You want to make a case, make it to Croft. Everything you say to anyone in this town will be on his desk by nightfall. That's how we work here. The recalibration moved through Gast's expression. She recognized it, the same moment she'd seen in Porter Thane, when the ground under a strategy gives way. He left without what he came for. Miriam sat in the chair she'd been in and felt the quiet physical aftermath of sustained tension. Not dramatic, just the unclenching of muscles that had been braced since before she even boarded the train in Cincinnati. Jesse sat across from her. You all right? He said. Yes. She looked at her hands. That was the conversation I've been dreading for months. I didn't know if I'd hold it. You held it before I came in. I know. But it mattered having someone at the door. She looked at him. Don't pretend it didn't. He didn't pretend. I won't, he said. There was a pause. He said her name, Miriam, quietly, with the particular intention he brought to it on the rare occasions he used it, so that she felt it land the way things land when they're meant. I know what you're going to say, she said. Do you? She held his gaze. That this changes things. That Gast is gone, but not finished. That what I came here to escape followed me and touched your ranch and your name, and that's not what you offered when you stopped on the road. That's not what I was going to say. Then what? He set his hat on the table between them. He looked at her for a long, deliberate moment. This place was quiet for a long time, he said. 7 years of quiet that was mine and nobody else's, and it isn't quiet the same way anymore. He held her gaze. I've been deciding whether to say that out loud or keep pretending I haven't noticed. I decided to say it. She felt the room rearrange itself in some way she couldn't precisely name. That's not a question, she said. No, he said. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you what's true for me, and what you do with it is yours to decide. She sat with it, the quality of it, the way he offered things, always without condition, always leaving the decision in her hands. I'm not finished with this situation, she said. Gast will go back and report and Chase will decide what comes next. I've been in this town 6 weeks. I know all of that, Jesse said. I'm telling you anyway, she said, because I think you should understand what you're saying when you say what you just said. I understand it, he said. She believed him. She had found in 6 weeks of working beside Jesse Rook that he was a man who meant things with their full weight, without excess and without reduction. She had been looking for that quality, without knowing she was looking for it, for a long time. All right, she said. All right, he said. Willard Gast left Ironwell on a Friday stage. Miriam knew because Edna told her at breakfast, in the tone of a weather report. Gone. But the unfinished quality of his leaving, the deliberate way he'd said we'll be in touch, stayed with her like a splinter she couldn't quite reach. She gave it 2 weeks before she stopped listening for unfamiliar horses. She kept working. The schoolhouse was cleaned out in October, county approval secured, a school board convened. Edna, Jesse, the pastor, and a rancher named Webb, whose daughter had been doing her arithmetic on a slate at home for 3 years with no one to correct her. They met in Edna's back room, and Miriam laid out what she needed, and what the county would provide, and what the school could realistically teach in the first term. She started with 12 students. By December, she had 19. The letter from her father arrived on a Wednesday in November, 6 weeks after she'd sent one of her own, measured, honest, saying exactly what needed to be said, and nothing more. Thomas Aldwell had written 4 pages, which she knew was more than he had written voluntarily in her entire living memory. He said he had known when he made the arrangement that it was wrong, and that he had made it anyway, and there was no accounting for that which made it smaller than it was. He said a man had come to him on Chase's behalf, trying to obtain a statement that Miriam had agreed to the contract verbally, He had told the man that no such agreement existed, and that he would say so to anyone who asked, in writing, in court, in any form requested. He said, at the very end, in handwriting that had gone unsteady on the page, that he was glad she had found somewhere worth staying. She sat in the schoolhouse after hours with the windows dark and read it 3 times. She didn't cry, but she sat for a long time with her hand pressed flat against the paper, feeling something that had been pressing on her chest for over a year shift, not lift entirely, but shift into something more bearable, something that had a different shape than it had yesterday. She found Jesse at the livery that evening. He turned when she came in, and she could tell by the quality of his stillness that he'd been waiting for something, without knowing quite what. "Letter from my father," she said. He waited. He confirmed everything. The contract was never valid, he'll say so to anyone. She paused. He also said he was glad I'd found somewhere worth staying. Jesse was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" he said. "Not what do you think, not what does this mean, what do you feel?" The question of someone who understood these were entirely different things. "Like something I carried a long way just got a little lighter," she said. "Not gone, just lighter." He nodded. He didn't move toward her or away from her. He simply held his ground the way he held all his ground, patient, present, without demand. "Jess," she said. "Yeah." She looked at him in the dim livery light, at the face she'd been reading for 4 months, and could now read the way she read figures, the weight of it, the direction of its grain, what it would do under pressure, and what it would hold. "You said this place wasn't quiet the same way anymore," she said. "Still true," he said, "more so now than when I said it." She let herself receive that, fully, without deflecting, with the complete attention of someone who has learned that being present for a thing is the only way to actually have it. "I came here with $9, she said. "I have a school now. I have a name in this town. I did that." She needed him to understand this first, needed it acknowledged before anything else. "Whatever happens next, that stays mine." "Yes," he said, immediately, without hesitation. "I'm not looking for someone to take care of me." "I know that." His voice was steady and quiet. "I've been watching you work for 4 months. I know exactly what you are. Then you understand what I mean when I say that what I feel about you has nothing to do with what I need from you." She held his gaze. "Because I don't need you, I'm choosing you, and that difference matters more to me than anything else in this." The livery went very still. One of the horses shifted in its stall. Outside, the wind moved across the high desert and passed. Jessie crossed the space between them and took her face in both hands, with the careful attention of a man who understands what he is holding. He looked at her for a moment that was brief and complete, and then he kissed her. It was not a theatrical kiss. It existed only because 2 people had arrived, after months of honest distance and slow accumulation, at the thing they had been moving toward, and they recognized it, and they met it without performance or pretense. When they stepped apart, she said, "Well." He said, "Well." Neither of them said anything else for a moment, because some things don't need to be immediately surrounded by words. "Come to Edna's," he said finally. "She'll know the moment she sees us, and she'll pretend she predicted it." Did she predict it? "Probably in October," he said. Miriam laughed. "The real kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself first." "All right," she said. Edna Pritchard did know. She looked at them for approximately 2 seconds, and turned back to her stove and said, without turning around, "I'll set a 3rd place." She talked all through dinner about the new family that had come from Utah and the county road that was supposedly being widened, and the fact that the Webb girl had shown a startling aptitude for long division. She made no direct reference to what she had read in their faces, which was itself the most generous kind of acknowledgement, giving people room to be ordinary, which is what they needed. They married in April, in the Ironwell church, which was full not because it was a social occasion, but because the people who filled it had watched something real take shape over the course of a winter, and wanted to be present when it was completed. Edna was in the front row. Marshall Croft was there in his good coat, which still held its shape because he wore it so rarely. The Webb girl was in the second pew, holding a slate she'd apparently brought in case she had a chance to show Miriam a problem she'd been working on, and nobody had argued with her about it. Miriam stood beside Jessie Rook in the same church where she had first spoken to a room full of strangers and said plainly, who she was and what she had and hadn't done. She said the words she meant in a voice that had not shaken on a dirt platform in the Nevada desert and had not shaken across a table from Willard Gast and did not shake now. Jesse said his words with the straight, quiet certainty of a man who means everything he says and needs no audience for the meaning. Afterward, in the April light, Edna pressed both of Miriam's hands in hers and said, without preamble, "I knew from the first morning." "I know you did," Miriam said. "You're going to be good," Edna said. "The two of you." "Yes," Miriam said. She meant it with the full weight of what it required, honesty and work and the particular courage of remaining known to someone across all the ordinary mornings ahead. It required choosing every day the person standing next to her. It required being chosen back. These were not things she was afraid of. She had crossed harder distances. The school opened on a Monday in September of 1883 with 24 students and 2 teachers, Miriam and Grace Hartwell, who had been running informal lessons from her kitchen and knew the Valley's children better than anyone, and a county charter and a sign above the door that said Ironwell School of Mathematics and Letters, which was a longer name than most people thought strictly necessary, but which Miriam had insisted on because she believed names should say what they were. She rode out to the ranch on Tuesdays. She rode back to town on Tuesday evenings. She sat at her desk on Wednesday mornings with the first students already filling the chairs, and she thought sometimes about a woman on a dirt platform in the Nevada desert with a case in one hand and a hat box on her wrist and $9.60 and a head that could hold numbers better than most people could hold anything. That woman had known, even then, that being left on a platform was not the same as being finished. She had made her list. She had stood up and started walking east. And somewhere on a road between nowhere and somewhere, a man had stopped. Not because he was owed anything for it, and not because he expected anything in return, but because a woman was alone on a road at sundown, and someone ought to have helped her before it came to that, and they hadn't, and he was there. She had chosen to get into the wagon. She would keep choosing every day of the long and ordinary and quietly remarkable life that followed. And the choosing, she had found, was the whole of it. The choosing was what made it hers.